we're talking a lot, of course, about the Uncommitted movement and the pro-Palestine and anti-genocide demonstrations at the DNC. The fact that they were denied a speaking slot, I mean, as of right now, the UAW has called on them to reverse course, and the squad as well. We'll see what happens there, but the fact that they've already declined it makes me extremely, pessimistic about that fact.
And we should just delineate the two S, which one was the not another bomb, which I think is the more substantial one, and then two, the second one, which I think is useful for them to put out, because if they deny just a basic, even pro-Kamala Palestinian elected to say, hey, we need to beat Trump, but also civilians are being killed, they can't accept that. It's crazy.
Right. They can't, because, they're thinking, we don't want to highlight a weakness at the DNC. We don't want to highlight the fact that, Biden is doing this and this may piss off our base. But what the Uncommitted movement is doing is saying, well, what is the trade-off here? Like, we're making it more of a liability for you to ignore us, potentially, than it would be for the rest of the base to like, in terms of it being a liability to have us up there. So that's what I'm appreciative of this, like, increased pressure, and it's going to continue. It's not going to die down. It's just going to ramp up. So Harris will have to be more explicit. It's just going to have to happen.
70 plus days to the election.
And that pressure is going to increase throughout that time period. And this is an example of some of the disruptions that I think are just going to continue to happen, as I keep saying. Nancy Pelosi, former House Speaker, Speaker Emerita, she got that title.
Now just string puller.
Yeah, I mean, very grateful for her service over these past few months of taking Biden out like a mob boss and then cheering him on as he gives his speech. I saw somebody say this is a mob boss showing up to the funeral of the guy that he just whacked, which I appreciated. But, Nancy Pelosi signed the letter about conditioning aid to Israel after the World Central Kitchen workers were killed, assassinated by Israel, and has been kind of just like quiet on it since then. Before that, she was mainly complaining that in her home in San Francisco as a multimillionaire, that the
Russians are
Russia was funding protests outside of her home, which is completely disconnected from reality.
But it is classic Pelosi, because if you read Ryan Grimm's book, We Got People, I believe is the first one, AOC's first meeting with Nancy Pelosi, I can't remember if it was defund the police or abolish ICE, but Pelosi's like, one of those slogans was planted by the Russians.
It's a thing. Yeah. She's deranged on this. Appreciative of her from like a wielding power perspective, so that she got Biden out of the race, but in terms of ideology, don't have too much in common.
Good to know what's possible, though, within the party.
Good to know what's possible, and the fact that she, as the power player that she is, signed on to that letter a few months ago about conditioning aid means we can create more and more oxygen in this situation with continued pressure. And this was when she was on Stephen Colbert's show. He did this live, and protesters disrupted the interview, and Colbert said, pointed to them and wanted her to hear what they had to say, which I appreciated from him.
We have to learn more about trust and peace and learning about each other rather than to have conflict resolved by war.
Well, as you can see from the continuing protest out here, that answer is unsatisfying to some people, because they believe that the United States. Hold on one second. Would you like to respond to what they're saying?
Yeah, well, what I was saying is,
will you listen to her response if she?
They're screaming. I can't hear them, but to those who have
They've
that
said
question,
that the United States should not have any role in supplying Israel arms to kill the people of Gaza now. That's what they're saying.
Israel has a right to defend itself.
Agreed. And the hostages should be returned.
And the hostages should be returned. But the other part of it is that has been so major for all of us for many years is that there must be a two-state solution. You cannot have peace unless you have a two-state. Israel a secure Jewish democratic state in the region, and the Palestinians having their own secure country there as well. Unless you have a two-state solution, we'll not have a resolution of this. And that is a time of opposition.
Please don't interrupt my guests.
Yeah.
So, Madam Secretary, Madam Speaker, we're a live show, so we have to go at this point.
So they basically ended the segment on that note. Good job. That was pablum from her. And also, as Matt said, it's an oxymoron to say that
Democratic. John Kerry, it's not just me saying it. John Kerry himself, in the final years of the Obama administration, said you can either be Jewish or you can be Democratic. You cannot be both. John Kerry is not an anti-Semite. He just understands that a demographic imperative for one type of person cannot coexist with an actual democracy. This is just objectivity.
You can't have a democratic ethnostate in a region where that ethnostate is an ethnic minority.
And even if they're majority, are you going to put in the Constitution that this has to stay that way? Because that's the Constitution of Israel.
That's the thing, is when, the two-state solution pablum is just that, right? It's the Democrats say this line, but I always try to put it within the context of racial segregation. You couldn't have true democracy in the South in racially segregated areas, right? Technically, Black people could vote, although they were second-class citizens, and in many parts of the South, there were poll taxes and other ways to prevent them from voting. But they were segregated and ruled over, though, by the same government in the same way. It's not exactly analogous.
And terror lynchings.
But it's not exactly analogous. But in the way that Israel rules over the 3 million people in the West Bank and the 2 million people in Gaza, they have governing authorities that range from either puppets in the West Bank, or in terms of Hamas in Gaza, which Gaza's been completely destroyed at this point, but a useful foil for Likud and Netanyahu and the Israeli government, which is why for nearly 20 years, Netanyahu and the Israeli government has propped Hamas up in Gaza, because they have a puppet government in the West Bank, and then in Gaza they have a group that they can say they're terrorists and they're incompatible with peace.
Yeah, basic divide and conquer.
So they rule over these people's lives, but they have no say in it, right? And when you put it in those terms, I wish that, and hopefully the conversation eventually gets there, how can you be democratic when you're segregating this country and this region by race and ethnicity and religion? How can you be democratic when Israel gets almost all of the land along the sea, which is extremely important for trade and prosperity, and then they're trying to take the rest of it in the Gaza envelope at this moment by destroying it and then settling it? Pushing all the Palestinians into the desert is not a just solution. And that's what a two-state solution is in reality.
Well, I think in this case, democratic is just a coded term for civilized. They're trying to draw the distinction between Israel, a civilized country, and their neighbors, Muslim countries, which are inherently uncivilized, by making democracy, part and parcel of that civilization. Even though they don't have a democracy, even though a lot of the things that they gesture towards, like LGBTQ rights, are superseded by their ethno-religious reality of Israel, they still use those terms because they know it's going to appeal to Americans broadly, and then they add extra things like the LGBTQ rights that Israelis enjoy, I guess, that are supposedly excluded from Muslims in other countries to appeal to liberals specifically. But the two-state solution, we're just far past that point. The West Bank is Swiss cheese due to settler violence, settler colonial violence that continues unabated to this day. I think also the ceasefire, people aren't really being realistic about what that would take or what that would mean, because for a large contingent of Israelis, Netanyahu included, and just the far right there generally, at this point, ceasefire is more or less an end to their state. Because the moment the bombs stop dropping on Gaza is the moment that the human rights offend the human rights court and start doing investigations. And so I think the Democrats are trying to take this posture that it's possible to have a ceasefire and for Israel to continue to exist in the way that it wants to exist, when that's just not the case. Like they just cannot have a ceasefire. Their goal is to get Americans involved so that there can be muting of that human rights investigation after, because then America might be implicated in it, which I mean, we already are. So we're already
That's 100% right. And just to quickly borrow from Kamala Harris herself, we're not going back. There's no way that we're going back to a reality that's before October 7th in the way that both internationally, besides the United States, the relationship is fundamentally changed with Israel. And there's no way to go back and for people to forget seeing one of the worst crimes in the history of the world being perpetrated on live stream in front of us.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that Biden being asleep at the wheel allowed this to get out of control, even from not just a moral standpoint, which this should have never been allowed to happen in the first place. And by that happen, I mean the systemic oppression of Palestinians at the hand of the Israeli government. But the genocide getting to this point, there really is no turning back. And it also deeply implicates the American foreign policy agenda for what it actually is, which is a neocolonial, neo-imperialist agenda. For a while there, America was able to define its, foreign policy by the assisting Ukraine and its, in its defense of its own borders from Russia. Now, I think this is more, indicative of what America actually is, which is genocide supporting,
our country was built on genocide. I mean, we should be explicit that America would not exist without the genocide of Native Americans. Yeah. So but we don't have that in our national imagination because we pretend like we have all this free press and things like that. But people don't ever, our history books don't reckon with what we've done to the indigenous population here, which is why there are so many people, honestly, in power that are okay with and in fact in favor of Israel doing the same in the modern day. It's a test of our moral progress, and we have failed spectacularly.
Well, we failed to reckon with the genocide of Native American people. We failed to reckon with slavery. We've failed to reckon with just the mountain of corpses that America was built on. And Israel is relying on that to justify its own modern day slaughter. But the circumstances are just, exactly. I mean, and ultimately, just within the West, we have positioned certain genocides as being necessary, just being necessary to the foundation of a Western social order. And so we might acknowledge, DNC might start with a land acknowledgement, but that's only to give lip service to a past that had to be removed in order for us to be here today, not to acknowledge that we should not be here the way we are.
Right.
And, this stuff, and the one thing I sort of blanch at sometimes from folks criticizing the current Israel policy is to say, this is like something we haven't seen. Abu Ghraib and Fallujah, that isn't disconnected. We didn't really get the full story of the type of torture that happened at Abu Ghraib. I don't take Seymour Hersh's word at complete face value on really anything these days, but I do think that is true, that we didn't feel, there wasn't a full investigation of that sort of thing. And those sorts of, the Seder Taman, the rape camp that was protested by pro-Israel or by Israelis saying, hey, keep this place open. I'm sorry, we did all that stuff in recent history too, we just don't have as much of a look over it. I mean, and look, I know that some service members don't want to say don't compare us to the IDF, but it is not as big of a change as people say, or big of a. And part of the reason the IDF feels such a license to do this is because of what we've been doing across the world. I mean, probably Korea on, but Vietnam definitely. That also is. I don't think Americans really understand. How horrific Vietnam was. I think we all realize it's bad that we drafted people to go die overseas. That was an evil war by America, and it was for to sell Bell helicopters and shit like that.
Also, the torture post Abu Ghraib didn't really stop. We just started exporting it to our allies in the region. To our allies in the region, not specifically Israel in this case, but a lot of our allies in the region, they have black sites there. Yeah, they have black sites in their country, and they're handling the torture so that Americans can, keep their minds clean about what their country is doing.
And I was I didn't mean to interject with you there, Matt. I was just going to add that it's also just regional in the sense that like America conceives of wars because of our massive land mass, and we have Canada, an ally, and Mexico, a trade partner and ally on the other side, on one side.
Wow.
I mean, oh well, what
an ally for now, but Kathy Hochul is saying that if Canada looks at us funny, we're gonna burn Quebec to the ground. Just like they did the White House.
No. She's like, what did she say? We're going to nuke Toronto or something like that? It's just unbelievable.
She was like, if Toronto tried to bomb Buffalo, we would nuke the shit out of those Canadians.
Flatten it.
Exactly.
Oh my God.
We'd bounce the rubble in Ottawa.
I think she said bounce the rubble.
No, I don't know.
We should look up the actual quote.
We should look it up. But
she said something along the lines of like, if Canada tried to like invade Buffalo or something, that we would like take the whole military might of America in response or something like that, and then immediately had to be like, I did not mean to cause an international incident by implying that.
She is the dumbest elected Democrat in the country at this moment. But yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say Americans are bloodthirsty, and a lot of liberals, they're just temporarily embarrassed patriots. They're just people waiting for the right cause to get violent over.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And what I was going with in terms of America's geography is just that like our wars of imperialism are far from our shores. Like the barbarity of the IDF is also because of the proximity and the like urgency that it engenders in their insane like radicalized population at this point. So with that said, I'm glad that those protesters interrupted Pelosi. She should be getting pressured on this, and that response was insufficient. But what else can you expect?
I expect hopefully someday to replace her in power with somebody not wasn't shaking Kennedy's hand in the 60s as a politician. Like how old are these people going to get? That's the worst thing about healthcare is rich people.
Well, to be fair to her, at least she didn't do Biden white knuckling, clinging onto power, and gave up her speakership to Hakeem Jeffries. Like I
prefer her to Hakeem Jeffries, but that's another.
That's true. That's true. She might be better than Hakeem Jeffries. That's rough to say, but yeah.
But I just want to read the. Go ahead, Brandon.
I was gonna say, as long as they keep letting her trade stocks, she's fine. That's
right.
I mean, she's earned a little stock trade.
She gets a little stock for getting Biden out.
I want to read some from Israel the Alternative, Tony Jett, in the New York Review books, I think 2003. But the crisis in the Middle East won't go away. President Bush will probably be conspicuous by his absence from the fray for the coming year, having said just enough about a roadmap in June to placate Tony Blair. But sooner or later, an American statesman is going to have. I mean, this is going on. Like he could use statesman and not have to worry about like, oh, that's a bit sexist. That's how long this conversation's been going on. Sooner or later, an American statesman or a woman is going to have to tell the truth to an Israeli prime minister and find a way to make him listen. Israeli liberals and moderate Palestinians have for 2 decades been thanklessly insisting that the only hope was for Israel to dismantle nearly all settlements and return to the 1967 borders in exchange for real Arab recognition of those frontiers and a stable, terrorist-free Palestinian state underwritten and constrained by Western and international agencies. This is still the conventional consensus, and it was once a just and possible solution. But he continues here. The time has come to think the unthinkable. The two-state solution, the core of the Oslo process, and the present roadmap is probably already doomed. With every passing year, we are postponing the inevitable, harder choice that only the far right and far left have so far acknowledged, each for their own reasons. The true alternative facing the Middle East in the coming years will be between an ethnically cleansed Greater Israel and a single integrated binational state of Jews and Arabs, Israelis and Palestinians. That is indeed how the hardliners in Sharon's cabinet see the choice, and that is why they anticipate the removal of Arabs as the ineluctable condition for the survival of the Jewish state. So, I mean, I would recommend that piece. Michael has cited that as one of his sort of formative essays. It is all that needs to be said. Yeah. And like Tablet Magazine and all these other Zionist rags are really, really sensitive about it, including even the New York Review of Books, who I think The Nation has taken a task for trying to pull some of Jett's punches since he died. But that is the essay you need to read, and that's where we need to go. And so all this stuff about two-state solutions and stuff, as a practical step.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think the UN should enforce like a demilitarized Palestine, where Israel-Palestine situation, because I don't think the conditions are being set to for coexistence at this moment in time. But that is the only way this goes forward, or it is ethnic cleansing and removal of all Arabs or Palestinians, to not take Judd's 2003 language, from that part of the world, which is what Israel sees. So that's why Ilan Pape talks about the one state reality. Like, that's just what it is. Two-state solution is just like ceasefire when coming out of these people's mouths. It is a lie killing time.
Well, as is democracy, as Brandon pointed out, in the sense that we prop up theocrats throughout the Middle East so that we can exploit that region, and we've been waging like a neocolonial, bombing campaigns there for decades because of the resources and things like that. We say we promote democracy, but it's only like the veneer for Israel, which is a substitute for civilization, because we actually prop up dictators in that region like almost exclusively. I mean, Sisi is not somebody who is a human rights advocate who the United States is sending, like, what I think they may be the second largest recipient of our military aid, if not the largest. They're close up there, but even, are the kings in Jordan, our relationship with Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. We rely on anti-democracy in this region for our foreign policy. This is what Matt was referring to here.
Yeah, and this is from, you can also find it if you don't subscribe to New York Review Books in his essay collection, When the Facts Change, which is also worth picking up.
We barely support democracy at home, so I don't see how we could possibly be expected to support democracy abroad. You guys don't even get the day off to vote.
Yeah,
I know. Well, I'll lighten the mood by reading an IM. It's not even that light, from Vaughn from Wisconsin. Emma, to be fair, Israel is doing as much as it can to not oversee that many Palestinians, which is true.
The one state reality.
Yep. Vinny P says, what do you think the ultimate solution is? I assume a two-state, Matt just answered it, but I assume a two-state solution is a temporary measure, but how do you balance the rights of indigenous Palestinians and Israelis who are so hostile? It must be imposed on them. Go ahead, Brennan.
No, yeah, exactly. It has to be imposed on them for all the times that America should be doing regime change. I know I just accused the liberals of waiting for a good reason, but this is one of those situations where, an international body of countries needs to step in and ensure that Israel becomes an integrated, fair state. Because the way they are now, as Matt has said, the governing party of Israel and a decent portion of the population believes that an integrated state is the same thing as being ethnically cleansed themselves. This is like the reality of the myth of white genocide as well, where the simple integration means death to them. And so they are executing a genocide of their own. And that's something that simply can't be allowed to be proliferated.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's the thing is the fortunate thing about the remaining population, which Israel is trying to remove from that situation, is that if you just extended one person, one vote, it would actually still have some bite to it democratically in a way that, for instance, doing that, we can't do that because of the 90% of Native Americans who were wiped out in our genocides, right? It can't just obviously, we can't just say it's one state to just be anarchy. Well, because the people with the most guns and military personnel would be Israelis. They would. I mean, what's going on in West Bank right now? But one person, one vote. And then if any Israelis don't like that, then America and Europe should accept them as refugees like they should have the first goddamn time 75 years ago, instead of saying, hey, actually, we got a better idea than you coming here because we can't handle all y'all. How about you go to a colonial outpost that we're going to use to disrupt the Middle East for the next 75 years? Like, I think there's plenty of Israelis who do not want to live in one person, one vote with Palestinians. And yeah, you know what? Shit. It's then you don't live in that part of the world anymore.
Go back.
Sorry.
I mean, then I know we have to get to other, like I said, we get to calls, and it's nearly 2:00. So, but you can end here, Brandon, if you don't mind.
No, I mean, like, that's the fear, though. Like, they're afraid of an integrated society because ultimately, it's not impossible for racism and bigotry to proliferate in societies that are integrated, but it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder to, raise your kids to be racist if they go to school with kids of a different race than they play with them. It's a lot harder to raise your kids to, look at people as lesser when their friends are those people. That's how a lot of people, turn themselves around. They have kids who are LGBTQ, or they, finally meet someone on their job who is like a person of color or at college, and they go, oh, wow, I just was full of bigotry before. And that's what they're afraid of too. But because again, their ideology positions that as in degradation of their project, of their ethno-nationalist project, which again also excludes lots of Jewish people too. You see that online all the time. You see them exclude not just Jewish people because of their race, but Jewish people because of their political opinions.
Hey folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.